Welcome to the Horace Goes Podcasting for Gamers with Pong Memories podcast series. I'm your co-host Kieran, and unfortunately we're missing my co-host John, but he will be back soon. I'm wishing you all well, John. Let's quickly recap on what we're doing in our series of podcasts. We talk about gaming in later life, ideas about how to game in retirement, how a growing number of gamers will be retirees, and discuss whether this will change games in any way. To do this, we're looking to get your views and opinions on these subjects, as well as hear about plans for gaming in retirement and real life stories of folks who have retired and what part gaming plays in their life. Is it a major hobby or something that's turned to now and then? What kind of games are being played by this segment, and how has each player's gaming life influenced the choices? It'd be great to hear from someone, for example, who had never gamed before retirement and took it up as part of having more time, or to explore some positive benefits. We're also going to dig into how the games industry will cater to this segment, and for that we're lining up industry veterans and insiders to quiz and find out more. I'm sure we'll uncover lots of great stories about game development and people's gaming memories along the way. We all have different journeys in gaming, having played different genre and different platforms and devices, having a different balance of playing solo versus multiplayer. Everyone's story is unique. It's fun to hear them all. Let's turn to this episode. John and I have practiced interviewing each other in previous episodes, and now we're graduating. Sadly without John this time. But we're calling this episode number 1 because we have our first real interviewee, Nick Thompson. Nick has 35 years of experience in the games industry, going from coding games in his bedroom to leading roles in AAA studios. He has lots to tell us about his career, his gaming, and is keen to share his thoughts on gaming in retirement. Welcome, Nick, to Horace Goes Podcasting. It's a privilege to launch the podcast properly with you in the hot seat.
Thanks for having me on your podcast.
You're welcome. So the first question we have for you today is a scenario where you're on a desert island and you have whatever gaming setup that you like to be able to play games. What game would you have? Because you're only allowed one, even with all of those fantastic technologies that you have in front of you on this desert island.
Well, I guess the obvious answer to something like that would be to have a game like Tetris, maybe, where you could just play it endlessly. But my favorite games are cinematic RPGs, adventures, racing games, games like Tomb Raider, Uncharted, God of War. So I think I would take with me my favorite game, The Last of Us. And I don't mind whether it's The Last of Us Part 1 or The Last of Us Part 2. Preferably I'd be able to take both. But I do think that if you're on a desert island, what you probably want to do is escape your environment for a while and just be somewhere else. And The Last of Us gives us that. I think it's endlessly replayable. I've played the first one 4 times, the second one 3 times. So I'm quite happy to replay it endlessly. And of course, it is a brilliant game.
Do you get to play it with a different style?
I do. One of the reasons I've played it so many times is because they keep improving the graphics, and that just gives me an excuse to play the latest version. Of course, you can play it on different difficulties, and as you know, probably if you complete the game, you get all kinds of options for playing it in strange and different ways.
Cool. I'd let you go with having part 1 and part 2 because it joins up. It's not like a Sims 1, 2, 3, 4 where it's the same thing again and again. What is the worst game? What absolutely would you not have there on the desert island?
I think worst game is a difficult option because if I start playing a game and I don't like it, I just don't play it. So the last example of this was Avatar, which I played recently, and I found that it was a bit too do this task, then do that task, then do the other task. Although the graphics are absolutely stunning, I also found myself struggling with the environment. I would run round and round the bottom of a mountain just trying to find a way up it. However, I do have a pet hate from the past, and that is mazes in games. Now, I don't mean maze games like Pac-Man. I mean, adventure games that pad the game out by putting a maze in the middle of it. And then you have to go left, left, straight ahead, right, up.
Just not good level design.
It's terrible, and it's literally only there to pad the game out. But you must remember, this is probably from the 80s and 90s, and we all made games then in very little memory. So a way of padding the game and prolonging it was to put a maze in the middle of it.
It's just easier to draw those scenes, isn't it? It's just a hedge or a wall in front of you.
Yes,
No
yes,
view. Yeah.
yes, the same wall, whichever way you turn.
What then, in comparison, would be a hidden gem that you've uncovered over the years that you would recommend to anybody to try?
I remember a golden era of my youth when I had a Spectrum and I was living in a flat with my wife before she became my wife. And we would play a game called Psytron, which was basically you had a base you needed to defend, but it was a two-player cooperative thing. So I could defend against the spaceships from above whilst my wife was defending against the creepy things that run along the corridors at the bottom. That's probably one of the first cooperative two-player things I ever played. Beyond that, by the way, I looked up Psytron recently. Looking at it now, it looks awful. The graphics are just terrible, how you can tell even what's going on. But at the time, we loved it.
It's all in the mind's eye.
And yes, you did used to have to use your imagination a lot more than you do now. Another game was Barbarian. Don't know if you remember it. I used to play it with my son on the Amstrad CPC. It was one of these combat games, one-on-one fighting game. You were a kind of an old barbarian with a large sword. If you won, you could chop the other person's head off. And my son just continuously kept chopping my head off. It took me a long time to realize that he'd found that if you just hold the joystick up to the right or something like that, you
Yeah.
win every time.
You got this amazing move.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
thought, wow.
as I keep
Anyway,
telling John, I get this experience if I play Super Smash Bros. With my daughter on the Switch, where she knows all the hotkeys and power moves and what to do. Because that one's a game with, I mean, that's one of the things that has changed since those early fighting games. Super Smash Bros., I don't know, you've got about 50 characters to choose from. And they've all got their own unique styles and fighting moves and power-ups. Basically, you specialize in one character or several characters. So when you just jump in the game, you have no clue the difference between what Mario can do or what Princess can do. You've no idea at all. So if you're playing someone who knows, you just get thrashed every time.
that's the one reason that I don't play online multiplayer much nowadays, because these young people sitting in their bedrooms just absolutely thrash me. Got no chance whatsoever. So another game I just wanted to mention was Stunt Car Racer by Geoff Crammond. In its day, that was brilliant. And one
It
thing
was, yeah.
Geoff is really good at is physics. So that's an absolute gem.
You could set up your course as well.
Yes, and it's on a sort of raised track. You were driving around a raised
Yes.
track in a
Yeah.
strange kind of stunt car. It would fall off the track if you crashed or whatever, and then you get chained back, lifted up with chains and pop back on the track again.
I think that was the first time in a game, it was on the Specky, wasn't it? Where you could lay out your own track and experiment.
Yes, it was on
Yeah,
the Spectrum, but it was also on the Amiga, Amstrad, and
yeah.
the Atari ST.
Going back as far as you can, what is your oldest memory of games or the first game you played? Might not be the same thing.
I did actually have a career before going into games. When I was very young, when I was a teenager, I was working as a gardener at the Brent Cross Shopping Centre. And with my first wage, I went and bought a very primitive console that only played Pong. If you don't know what Pong is, it's basically two bats, which are just a line, and a ball, which is normally a square, bouncing in between them. And you have to move your bat up and down to bat the ball back to the other person. However, this console had variations of Pong. So it'd have like table tennis, it would have badminton or squash, where you have like three walls and then you're batting the ball against the walls.
Did that console do any other games, or did it just come loaded with those? You didn't have cartridges or anything to play anything different. It was just dedicated to Pong.
Dedicated to Pong, had nothing
Yeah.
else, just variations of Pong. Unfortunately, someone broke in and stole it. So
Oh,
I only had it for about a month before it was gone.
sad end. You've had a long career in the games industry, and you must have started when it was a very small community. So how did you get into games development?
Well, as I said, I had a career before games. That's how come I'm retired. And most people aren't from games because I was always older than I've always been older in relative to other people since the beginning of the games career. And originally I was in the motor trade managing garages in central London. And I went out and bought myself a Sinclair Spectrum, taught myself to program it. In those days, there weren't any courses that you could take. You had to teach yourself. And I started programming it in BASIC and then moved on to programming it in assembler.
Because not everybody listening to the podcast will know the distinction. Assembler is about as close as a developer that you can get to
Machine
manipulating the
language.
processor. I mean, I've done assembler in the past as well on the mainframe, which is a little bit bigger than the Spectrum. It's brutal in terms of what you have to process in your head and in terms of translating really, really simple instructions into big picture things. And at least where I was doing assembler, it was basically about moving data around and doing lots of arithmetic and things, but turning it into graphics and the like is a huge leap of the imagination.
Yes, one of the reasons you had to program in assembler was because there's so little memory that you had to make use of every single byte. You couldn't waste anything. And assembler is way more efficient than an interpreted language like BASIC. I knew when I started programming the Spectrum that it's what I wanted to do. I left the motor industry, moved to Wales and joined a company called Goliath Games, where we did a couple of things to Buteo, World Championship boxing manager, but I got made redundant in the end from Goliath Games. So I started contracting, making what we used to call pocket money games, which were kind of Spectrum and Amstrad games on tape that you'd go down to Smith's or whatever and just they didn't cost very much. For D&H and Codemasters, other small companies at the time, people said to me, even at that point, even family said to me, get yourself a real job. I had a wife and children, so they were like,
You know,
stop
to
playing with
support them.
games.
I think even still to some degree, there's still that mentality, even although it's an industry with many universities teaching degrees in all aspects of game development. And
It
I
is.
don't know,
And
it's like
also,
40,000 plus people employed in games in the UK.
the games industry is far bigger than the movie business in terms of turnover and revenue
Yeah,
and all these
it
sort of
is.
things. So, but I mean, in those days, it was just beginning. I've got a job with Microprose UK where I did, amongst other things, I worked on the XCOM series with Julian and Nick Gollop.
Wow.
Then went on to work with Geoff Crammond on his Grand Prix series. And then after that, I moved to a company called Jagex, which was a tiny company at the time I moved there. Only a handful of people. I created a whole suite of tools for them for their game RuneScape. RuneScape now is absolutely massive. By
Yeah,
the
it
time I
is.
left, I was chief technical officer and the studio had grown to 500 people. After a bit more contracting, I went to Stainless where I met you, Kieran, Carmageddon. And then I finished my career at Codemasters, working on things like Dirt Rally 2 and Grid
Yeah.
Legends.
As you mentioned, we worked together at Stainless Games, and I had a short time in the industry, and I found it very different to the more traditional companies that I've worked for before and after. It was a lot more informal, but with a real focus on the product being produced. Sometimes that focus was very intense, and a lot of passionate people about what we were producing, and obviously the whole industry and the content. What do you think about the working conditions in the games industry?
It's fairly well known that the games industry puts a lot of pressure on, or has in the past put a lot of pressure on its employees to work evenings and weekends and things, especially on deadlines. And normally you don't get paid for that either. You
No
basically,
overtime.
no, there's no overtime pay. I joined the industry when it was very young, and the industry's been through a lot of growing pains. There are a lot of big companies that thought this is a new expanding area. We should be in this area to keep up or to make money. But then they didn't really have a clue about it. They would go bust. So frequently companies would be taken over, companies would go bust. companies would drive you to work all sorts of hours because they wanted to try and make a profit, but they were making a loss. So, for instance, I was working at Microprose, but during my time there, it became Spectrum Holobyte, then Hasbro Interactive, then Infogrames, which later renamed itself to Atari. So you can see that even just working at that one company, it was taken over, then taken over, then taken over. I worked with Geoff Crammond on his Grand Prix series. We used to work till 3 o'clock in the morning together, just the two of us with headphones on and a telephone connected to it. One time I went down to the toilet. It was heaven knows what time in the morning. I went down to the toilet and my phone went and I just answered it. I wasn't even thinking, I was probably exhausted at the time. And Geoff almost immediately says, "Are you on the toilet? I can hear what running water in the background." So I'm thinking quickly to myself and I go, "No, no, I'm in the kitchen just making a cup of tea. I'll give you a call when I get back to my desk."
Seems
I've
legit.
never answered. I've never answered the phone on the toilet ever again. We worked crazy hours, and after two of the games, when they finally mastered, I actually broke down in inconsolable tears and couldn't stop
No.
crying for, like an hour or so, just from exhaustion.
Pure exhaustion,
I
yeah.
Yes, pure. And after other after other projects finished, I got ill.
Yeah.
It's very often you make it to the end of the project and then you kind of collapse
Just
because you've been
burnout, yeah.
working. Yeah, so I
Yeah.
don't think it's good practice. And in fact, in the last role I was in where I was asked to work weekends and that for nothing, I just said no. But
Yeah.
hopefully practices are changing. I think they're widely changing because it's not a great way to, you probably don't get the best out of your workforce. Normally
No.
these things are done to try and meet financial imperatives, like the new
Yeah.
financial year or something. They want the game released before the new financial year.
But they don't
So
work out in the long term for the company. I can see actually quite a lot of parallels with what you're describing now about a young industry and a lot of enthusiasm for the goal and the target and the concept that is now starting out maybe around Gen AI, generative AI. Lots of people getting onto that bandwagon, shall we call it, and maybe not focusing on the value of what they're trying to produce. They just want to make something. And that must have been the case early days
you
in the
make
games industry. We're just going to make a game. Not, is it a game that's good that people want to play, that they will play for a long time? We just make a game.
You make a good point. And I do think that if you want to attract and retain good staff, you need to have reasonable working conditions.
You touched on it tangentially there. Redundancies are a harsh reality of the games industry. And I know you've experienced layoffs yourself and had to do them and perform them. And I've had personal experience of it as well. It's a pretty bad, very bad experience, but you have to bounce back in the end and find the next role. Is this boom and bust pattern the worst thing that you've seen in the industry, or is it something else?
I think it is probably the worst thing in the industry. There was a lot of hiring teams to do a project and then getting rid of them afterwards and things like this, which is just terrible practice. But I personally have been made redundant a few times, and that was quite devastating and difficult to manage when you find your salary has suddenly disappeared and you've got a wife and children and a mortgage to pay and this sort of thing. But I think it was even more devastating having to make a team redundant. That really got to me, and I actually went home. I got a large cardboard box and a shovel, went to the bottom of the garden and beat the box to death, just to because of the tension.
Got to let it out.
It
Yeah.
was awful. And my wife saw me out the window, but she didn't say anything. Probably wise.
Let them get
I
on
just
with
had.
it.
I don't think I'm cut out to do that, and I would avoid it at all costs. Making a team redundant, knowing what you're doing to other people when you're letting them
Yeah.
go is it's devastating.
When I was having it done to me, I could tell that the people who were doing it they were very emotional, and it's not pleasant on either side, but it is the harsh reality of economics. You mentioned earlier you avoid these days multiplayer games, but what do you play if you are going online to play a multiplayer game? Or if you're avoiding it totally, why are you avoiding it?
I mentioned Psytron, It had a two-player mode. I mean, I do like multiplayer. I tend to avoid it, particularly in fighting games nowadays, because I think just the pure twitch speed of young people
Yeah.
is way beyond me. So I tend to just lose all the time and get disheartened. There are lots of types of multiplayer, and I'm happy to get involved in these. I mentioned Psytron, but when I was at Hasbro, did you know that they actually did XCOM as an email game? I think you
No,
mentioned email games on one of your
I did.
podcasts, but
Yes.
my good friend Adrian Scotney programmed the XCOM version of Hasbro email. I
Cool.
don't think the server is you can still get your hands on one, I think, like on eBay or whatever. I don't think the server's still running, so it wouldn't work. Again, at Microprose, we used to have a Quake trophy, which was a homemade trophy, and every lunchtime we'd play Quake. But in those days, you were able to upload a picture of your face, so you could literally skin your face onto your character. And so we were literally running around shooting each other at lunchtime. Every lunchtime, and that was great fun. I absolutely loved that, so especially if you win the trophy. Of course, I worked at Jagex for many years on a title called Runescape, and
Yeah.
Runescape is a massively multiplayer online role-playing game that, just to give you an idea, 300 million accounts have been created in Runescape. At any one
Wow.
time, if you go online, there's tens of thousands of people playing at the same time. It actually is very involving game. When I first went to Jagex and I started playing it, I'd find myself still at 2 o'clock in the morning playing it, not
Playing it because
realizing
you were
that,
enjoying it.
yeah, absolutely. You get really involved in it. In fact, my wife used to work in a library. She used to run a library, and she had to ban the school children from playing RuneScape on the library computers because they would bunk off school and come in and play on the
That's my
library
husband's fault.
computers.
I'm sure there are other industries where it's the same, but for me, this is the only place I've experienced that it is a very tangible product that you're making in the games industry. You can sit and play your own product, play your own game, and enjoy it, and be one of your own customers in many ways.
I find that if you find yourself playing the game that you're making a lot, you're making a good game.
When you're playing multiplayer games, who are you playing them with? And it could be video games or physical ones like board games.
We used to, as a family, sit down around the computer and play adventure games like maybe Seventh Guest, that sort of thing.
Not
And
familiar
where
with that one.
you're basically solving puzzles,
Yeah.
things like that. So you go along. Yeah, I've got two boys. The boys, along with my wife, we'd sit around the computer of an evening playing adventure games. We used to play a lot of them, and we really loved it. So both my sons are now keen gamers. The only trouble is, of course, they've got high pressure careers. So the only time we really get together where we're all in the same room is Christmas. And become a Christmas tradition where we give each other new games for Christmas, and then we all sit around at Christmas playing games.
Have a play.
Uh,
What
and
what
of
device is that on?
Normally on the PlayStation. But I've now got three grandchildren. The youngest is only a month old. The
Congratulations.
oldest, thank you. The oldest is 4, moving towards 5 now. And I've introduced him, of course, to things like Peppa Pig, CBBS on the iPad. We've had a session of Mario Kart on the
Cool.
Wii. I've got the little steering wheels, and he loved that. More recently, I brought him a Paw Patrol game for the PlayStation to get him started. Yes, and
Yeah.
he was very good at it. So I've got another generation to nurture.
So going back to your time in the industry, what was your favorite game team to be part of or favorite project you worked on?
Most places I've worked, actually, teams are very close, so I've got a lot of good friends from the industry over the years. The games I've worked on, though, are so diverse that it would be difficult to pick one and say that's my favorite. For instance, XCOM Terror from the Deep, I loved working on that. We were only a small team. Yeah, had great success. Geoff Crammond's Grand Prix 3, I mentioned, and Grand Prix 4. Originally, just I was brought in to work with Geoff on Grand Prix 3 because at that time, hardware was transitioning. So you were getting acceleration cards and things like that in PCs. You need hardware rendering in your game. He only rendered in software. So I was brought in to do the hardware rendering part of it. But I say Geoff only rendered in software. We went to, I think it was ECTS, which was Electronic Computer Trade Show. The hardware rendering wasn't ready, so we showed Grand Prix 3 off, but we showed it rendered completely in software, and everything else at the show was rendered in hardware. But Geoff actually won game of the show with his game still rendering in software, and that's how good his software rendering was. In fact, when I came to convert it to hardware, I found that each drop of rain, he was refracting the light from behind it, which is which is just incredible. And he was doing
Huge
that in
amount of
software.
processing. And
And
of course, trying to do that, I suppose in those days it wasn't 120 frames a second that people are worried about these days, but still 30
yeah.
frames a second and calculating that 30 times a second is big numbers.
Of course, it was really difficult to try and translate that sort of thing into hardware rendering because manipulating individual pixels at that level would be slow, you know. But
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
yes, we managed it in the end. And then I went on to do Grand Prix 3 2000 season on my own whilst building up a team to do Grand Prix 4. We had quite a bigger team to do Grand Prix 4 other than just Geoff and me working on it.
Yeah.
So.
You saw it grow.
It won a BAFTA for Best Sports Game of the Year in 2002. So, I mean, that was a brilliant game to work on again. But again, I got exhausted by the end of it. In fact, you're talking about working conditions. A couple of times in my career, I've had teams refuse to work overtime. They down tools. You know, they're like, we've
Mm.
had it. We just can't keep going. And that was one of the games at the end there where we were driven so hard that the team basically decided they'd had enough. They
Yeah.
weren't going to do it anymore. But beyond that, RuneScape, I love RuneScape. Dirt Rally 2, I love rally driving. So that's one of the games I spent more time playing it than programming it. Yeah, actually, I was a producer at that point, so I was producing it. And then the last game I worked on was Grid Legends. That was interesting because the first time I've had to source a studio and actors and hire like a film crew to do all the story mode. And I mean, this is an interesting thing with the progression of games, racing games, as well as other games, is that it's not good enough now to just have a career mode where you go, you have risen to the rank of, now you need a cinematic story mode in the game. And I do think
Mm.
that's the way it's all going. So yes, now we have to source studios, hire actors, and it's a very expensive and intense project to do.
Something else that's growing is soundtracks compared to the early days of beeps and all the way to full orchestras now.
Yes, on my first Spectrum games, I used to do all the sounds myself just by manipulating the one little speaker that it was
Yeah.
in there. But
Did you
now,
compose music back then?
no, I didn't compose music, mostly sound effects. But now, I mean, you can use sound to great effect. If you think about horror games, having a sound suddenly come from behind you makes you whirl around and can creep you out. Sound's a really powerful thing.
Tell us some more about your gaming. What are you playing just now?
I've just started playing Alan Wake 2. The Alan Wake series, it's like a crime solving game where you have to find clues and put them all together. And it's very nicely done, very nicely rendered. I've only just started it, so, I can't tell you too much about it other than it's beautiful, but gameplay is quite slow. Before that, I played Still Wakes the Deep, which is a game set on a oil platform off the coast in Scotland somewhere, and it's a sort of horror game. Well, I have to be careful what I say here because I used to work with the producer, Bruno Julien, and you and I both used to work with the technical manager, Nick Slaven. So we don't want to say anything bad about Still Wakes the Deep. It is actually probably not as polished as it could be. It definitely has its moments. I found it quite relentless, but there are definitely some great moments in it, and it's well worth playing. Funnily enough, before that, I played The Last of Us Part 2 for the third time. As I say, that this time it's the PlayStation 5 version or whatever. They've upgraded the graphics again, although to be honest, you can't tell that much difference. But I just love the game, so I play it over and over. Before that, someone lent me Hogwarts. I
The
wasn't going
Hogwarts
to play
Legacy.
Hogwarts. Yes, because they recommended it, and actually, it was pretty good.
What future releases are you looking forward to playing?
Well, I play quite a lot. My wife is quite
Sounds like you
forgiving.
get through the games, yeah.
Yes, because she knows I was in the industry, so she never complains when I want an afternoon to just I'm retired. I can sit
Do
all
this.
afternoon and play these games. I'm looking forward to Silent Hill 2. It's the sort of thing I like.
Another horror adventure.
Horror adventures, I think I like those kind of first person adventure horror. It's escapism. It's great fun. It's not too much twitch, fast shooting,
Yeah.
fighting. Anything by Naughty Dog, who did The Last of Us and Uncharted games I love. So I'm greatly looking forward to whatever they produce next. And also I hear that GTA 6, Grand Theft Auto 6 is on the cards. Whenever that comes out, I'm looking forward to that. I enjoyed Grand Theft Auto 5. The only thing is, right at the beginning of the game, you know how like you press all the buttons on the controller to see what they all do. So I was standing in the street and I started pressing the buttons and a passerby, I punched him in the face. He fell to the ground. And next thing I'm surrounded by police. I'm
Probably
like,
not the
oh,
worst thing that's happened in somebody playing Grand Theft Auto, mind you,
no, it's
just
probably
punching a
not the
passerby.
worst, but I thought it was hilarious. I was like, I was
Yeah.
only trying to try out the controller, and now I'm
Sorry,
surrounded by
officer.
police. Yes.
Okay, that wasn't a positive effect on the health of that passerby, virtual passerby, just to underscore that. We've discussed, John and I, that we think, there's a positive effect from playing both physical and mental in later life. How do you think that games can aid health?
Well, that's interesting because when you're playing games, as I said, I'm sitting in an armchair. So,
That doesn't seem so
so
healthy part of it.
I do have, so I think probably the Wii is the best console that I've ever had for actually getting up and doing things. I mean, there's Wii Sports, so you can do
Yeah,
tennis or bowling or golf or whatever you fancy. I've also got the Wii Fit. So, I mean, if you're physically thinking about physical activity, those are the sort of things I would do. Although personally, I don't because I've got an allotment. I'm actually building a pub in the garden out of reclaimed wood as a sort of project. I do a lot of home brewing. So if I want to keep fit, I probably wouldn't bother with the Wii. I'd go down the allotment
you need that breadth of different things to do.
and the fresh air. I do think that just playing any games is good to keep your mind active and also your reactions sharp. Most all games need thought and sharp reactions. So I do think that there are benefits to playing games, just not excessively.
Indeed. And yeah, as with anything, it needs to be part of a balanced hobby lifestyle. One of the things that is happening in any game is decision making and keeping that sharp as well is really
Uh,
important.
Absolutely, yes. I do think it keeps your mind sharp, but also there's a lot of quite enjoyable escapism in
Oh,
games.
completely.
You go to different countries, different places, different times in history. I love it.
Yeah.
And rally driving, of course, is
Oh, yeah,
that's quite
intense.
physical. I also, whenever there's a Grand Prix on, I drive the track before the Grand Prix so that I know all the corners and I know. So, but then I've been involved in Grand Prix games for many years, and the latest Grand Prix games are by Codemasters, who I worked for.
So are you keeping up with tech, or do you think you'll stick with the devices that you have now throughout your retirement, or will you be getting all the latest VRs in 10 years' time or whatever?
I do like to keep up with tech in the house. So if a PlayStation 6 comes out, I'll definitely have it. The thing is, the industry as a whole, as a developer, it's been very fast paced and ever changing. I mean, it's come so far. We used to make games. Well, I used to make games just on my own, doing all the sound and everything. Now we have teams of hundreds of people. Things have changed massively in the industry, and I've spent 35 years working in it and having to keep up with every part of
Every
the
move.
industry as it's
Yeah.
doing. So I'm quite happy now that I'm retired, not do that and just to
Enjoy what you
chill,
enjoy. Yeah,
just
no,
to
to think
chill.
deeply
Yeah,
about it.
and be on the consumer side of getting the latest tech. Where VR's concerned, I don't actually have a VR, and it's because I suffer from motion sickness quite badly. A few years ago, I hired a Harley with my wife, and we drove from LA to Las Vegas, up through Utah to Colorado, down through New Mexico, and back along Route 66 via the Grand
Cool.
Canyon. But I did get motion sickness even just driving the
Even on a
Harley.
Harley.
A lot of games I have to turn off motion blur and things like that, which helps with the motion sickness. And I don't subscribe to VR at the moment.
I've done it a bit in the past. John plays it a lot more, speaking for him while he's not here, and keep thinking about investing in the newer ones that do mixed reality as well.
I hope you've got a room large enough to wave your arms around in that you don't end up
Yeah,
knocking your ornaments over.
well, yeah. I have fallen into a fireplace in the past, thinking that there was a table in front of me when actually there wasn't, because I was just in the
Oh,
game. But yeah, you can do some strange things that you're not expecting. Punch real people by accident. Yeah, I was playing sometime when I was playing with my daughter on the VR, and I can't remember who punched who. That's how bad my memory is. But one of us, while having the goggles on, didn't realise and sort of stretched out for something, and the other one of us was a bit too close and got clouted. But that is the hazard of sharing a room with somebody playing with the VR. You have to keep the wits about you on both sides. Should the industry release games targeting older players? We talked about them targeting young players earlier with Paw Patrol and the like. And what kinds of games do you think would appeal if you think there's some differentiation that should be made?
well, my short answer to this is no, I don't think the industry should be making games aimed at older audiences. To make a game nowadays, as I said, you need a team of hundreds of people, but the expense is enormous and it can take years just to make one game. I don't think the market for an older audience would be big enough to make it viable. But also, I think as a retired person myself, I like to play whatever's current, whatever's going and see what trends there are in the industry. There are some great games out there. I'm not sure older players would want games aimed just at them, and I'm pretty sure the industry wouldn't find them viable to make.
It's a growing segment, though. There are more people like you, more
Yes, and
people
you
like
might
me.
think maybe more, or maybe these retired people have disposable income, so
Yeah.
you definitely want to include older people. I
Yes.
don't think you want to aim as a demographic
Target at them.
for older people. Yeah.
With whatever the equivalent of Paw Patrol would be for the over 60s or something. There would presumably, as you say, inclusion is a thing, and whether that is, I don't know whether it's about having some form of customization, whether it's different skins or just thinking about what you're selling that are extensions that might appeal to that older segment that isn't just thinking about the TikTok generation.
I think you're entirely right that, when you're creating your avatar, there are options that make them look like you as an older person, just as there are options
Yeah,
for
yeah,
younger people. But as well as that sort of thing, I think you need options like easy mode, subtitles, audio,
yes.
accessibility options.
Yeah.
Just generally accessibility options that make it easier as you get older for playability.
To get in and enjoy the game. It's all about enjoying the game, whatever game it is, in the way that appeals to you as an individual player.
Yeah, just make lots of options, and as a player, I'll go through them all, turning subtitles on and taking off motion blur and that sort of thing, tailoring it to myself.
As you all know, the cost to the developer in that is the amount of testing that's required for all the viable and non-viable combinations of options.
Yes, indeed.
So which fictional character deserves to be brought to life in games, do you think?
That's a tricky one. Most viable characters actually already have their own games. I do think, though, the type of game that I like, cinematic role-playing games, crime-solving games, maybe someone like Cormoran Strike, Robert Gilbraith, which is really J.K. Rowling. He's a small-time investigator. He's been in Afghanistan and he's ex-military and he's got a damaged leg. And he has a psychic assistant called Robin. what I really like about games is storytelling, the human experience. I think J.K. Rowling's very good at the human element. What's it like to be human and the trials and tribulations, the relationships and things like that, as well as them being, great detective style stories.
Have to live that as a player.
Yeah, exactly. So that's my style of game.
I suppose everybody will have their fictional character that they would love to get to be in a game. Something, I suppose, slightly tangential. I was on a course this week that our course instructor was asking the question, what helps? What is the best way to grow empathy? And we had a discussion, and she said, well, there's evidence that shows that reading books helps grow empathy because you are that character. It's in your mind's eye. You're creating that person in your head, so you are therefore thinking through different perspectives as you read about different characters, and we can play that out in games as well.
Absolutely. I can totally see your point, or the instructor's point. Yes, I do think that's one aspect of games that's very interesting. Get a lot more characters now than you used to in older
Yeah,
games. Young people, older people, male people, female people. It's much more inclusive than it used to be.
this is the final question on the theme of the podcast. What trends for older gamers or anything else in games that excite you?
Well, I love the way games have become more immersive and cinematic. So for me, it is escapism. And I love, as I said previously, to visit different times in history, different parts of the world, and maybe even fantasy worlds like Avatar, which the world
Hmm.
was beautiful in Avatar. I love all that sort of thing. Young people, I do think, are different. They're used to social media, they want social games. I don't personally subscribe to perpetual games or game worlds where you all meet up socially as well as playing the game, because I think young people are very interested in social interaction. As I've got older, I'm kind of less worried about that sort of thing. I find that if you join a world like a perpetual world where there's a lot of social interaction, you actually kind of get drawn in and you get
Yep.
involved in these things,
So
and
it's
it
like the
becomes a
World of Warcraft situation.
yes, it becomes a pressure to play and to meet your friends and to get involved and things like
Yeah.
that. And I've got too much else going on in my life. When I socialize, it's because I'm volunteering for the local food bank, marshalling for the Remembrance Day parade in our village. As an older person, getting involved with the village life, that sort of thing is more what I'm interested in. And I wouldn't like to get caught online feeling social pressure to keep getting involved in these things. So I'm not sure that actually explained what trends for older gamers excite, but I strayed off the point there.
But you do make an interesting point there, and kind of generalizing here, that while you're in work and employment and in your career, sometimes coming home, for those that still come home from the office, or switching room possibly or device to chill out playing some games at the end of the working day is almost about escaping people because you've been talking with folks, working with folks all day long, and now you want to control your own environment, have your own space and time and everything. You can almost switching it round and going, okay, the gaming is now for just the fun element. It's something to, it's enjoyment, but there's no real people connection there, even if you do have some sort of multiplayer game. But getting out, having that real interaction in a community setting is a very important counterbalance to it.
Yes,
Cool.
indeed. Me
It's a
time.
yeah. There's a different kind of me time. It's interesting to hear about for you how that lens has changed between the role of games, even although you might be playing the same games, between the two parts of your life, the role that it's playing is different.
Yes, I've got to tell you that I do love being retired because, you have a lot more of your own time to decide what you want to do with
To
it.
choose. Yeah,
I also look after the grandchildren and things like that,
yeah.
which is great. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, I was thinking that probably choosing your best, most favorite game project or team that you'd worked on is maybe like choosing your favorite grandchild. Of course, it's
Yeah.
impossible.
Well, I'm interested in why you and John chose the area of retirement, games in retirement, and discussions around that sort of area. When I assume, Kieran, that you're a few years off that sort
I'm a
of
few
thing.
years off, and John's a few years off too. It came to mind because one thing you do have to start planning for a while before you retire is your financial situation, and making sure as best as you can that you'll have the right amount of funds for when you retire. So just because I was at some point in time thinking about that, oddly enough, on the toilet, just going back to that earlier point, I thought, well, what will I do when I'm retired? I'm thinking about how much pension or whatever I'll have. What am I going to be doing with it? So that got my mind to, what do I do now as my hobbies? Gaming is one of them. So it just made me think about what impact will that have on my time in retirement. So that's what got me thinking about it. And it is a growing area. That population of people, or the percentage of people who are retired, that percentage will increase as more folks from our generation,
and as we live a little bit longer.
as well.
But yes, I mean, I think it's one of the things. When I was coming up to retirement, couldn't play games because I was working quite a lot of hours.
Well, yeah, till late in the morning.
And most games will take you 20, 30, 40 hours to play. So I was looking forward to retirement when I can just play games. But actually, when you get to retirement, you find you don't have as much time on your hands as you thought you did, especially if you have grandchildren.
Yeah.
And somehow your time still seems to get filled up.
I mean, that's heartening to hear. Another aspect that maybe will come out in this podcast is for those of us who are on that pathway towards retirement, it seems like a bit of a cliff. Part of what we can explore with people who are this side of retirement, my side of retirement versus yours, is how games maybe can help with the transition, or knowing that you've got something either side that shares, and not like having to discover new stuff to do. That's all that I wanted to explore when I thought about doing this, that talking to folks like yourself who are retired and are gaming, and can talk about how they're taking that hobby and using it and enjoying it, hopefully, as well as people my side of it and John's side of it who are looking forward and thinking, what's it going to look like? It's a big question. You don't know, I suppose, till you make the step. And of course, some people leave that step for as long as possible, and what does that mean as well?
Yes, we're all individuals. I found it something to look forward to, not something I was worried about. How will I fill my time or whatever? I mean, my wife and I, we were like, we'll watch every DVD in our DVD collection. We haven't watched one of them. I've been retired 4 years and I haven't watched one of the DVD collection films. You do, your time does get filled,
Yeah.
and with some lovely and important things, but also you have more leisure. It's certainly nothing to worry about.
That's a great statement to finish on. And thanks very much, Nick. It's been a great discussion, hearing about many of your experiences in the industry. I'm sure there were many, many more, but it was fantastic getting that highlight reel, as well as these heartening ideas about and experiences about retirement and the role that games is playing. So thanks very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I've enjoyed talking to you, and I hope that your podcast goes from strength to strength.
Thanks very much. I hope you all enjoyed that interview with Nick Thompson. A final reminder that we're on the lookout for more people to interview. If you've enjoyed Nick's journey in games and want to share your own, or maybe you've got a different opinion about how best to approach gaming in retirement, then get in touch with us and come on the show and let the world hear about you and your thoughts on games in later life. If you do, then we'll get the chance to reminisce about your time growing up in games, as well as talk about the future. Thanks for joining us for our first proper interview. John will be back next time with his humour and future-looking views. We look forward to welcoming you all again. Bye for now.